Hey everyone, welcome back to Grid Chat. I am your host, Marissa Tandon. Today we are covering Baku because what a race. What a race. And one of my favorite guests is back, Jordan Chapman.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me back.
Thanks for coming to Yap with me. And you know what? Honestly, every once in a while, I'm like, I feel like when I pick certain people, races get more exciting. Like last week we had Amanda on, and every time Amanda's been on the show, Charles Leclerc has won. And now I'm almost like, should I have kept her on for one more week? Because what a mess. But I feel like whenever you come on, we have chaos.
We do.
And bell-to-bell banger behavior. So I'm starting to believe that Grid Chat is the only thing that matters when it comes to races.
People
happening.
can predict the rest of the season based on who you have for your race recaps as the guest.
I know. I need to probably start releasing the guest list ahead of time so that people can prepare. You know what I mean? We're just manifesting over here.
I'll change my fantasy predictions based on who's next.
Well, if you're into that, you should be, I guess, following Grid Chat a little closer because we love to influence the race. I have to be honest with you, we actually have so much to get through, even just before the race started. I am thrilled. I will also say this is one of my favorite tracks visually because of the castle stretch, because they zoom, and I'm like, imagine if also at certain points they got to wear suits of armor in duel. You know what I mean? Like if it was like a, what's it called? Those, a triathlon.
Like medieval times. Oh.
Yeah.
No, such different ideas on that.
I was thinking how they have separate events, like a triathlon has biking, swimming, and running. This would be a triathlon of a Grand Prix, a sword fight.
We went so differently on that.
We did. It's okay. I'm just, pitching new sports. You're pitching dinner theater. What can you do? You could also get what would be kind of fun is what do they call it when they have the lances and they're on the horse and they run at each other?
Jousting?
Joust. Yes, a joust, but with F1 cars. Imagine.
Well, we kind of did have that. I don't want to spoil
right.
it, but for anybody who watched it, we did have a little bit of a
joust.
Yeah.
A little tango, as one might say. Well, let's chat about some of the extenuating circumstances before the race. Kevin Magnussen was finally handed his race ban. And I'm curious about why this one was the one they finally decided, because in my opinion, I think Monaco was a bigger deal and they decided not to give him penalty points.
I think if Monaco wasn't a first lap incident, I think he would have gotten a race ban there. It made no sense. But I feel like that's the only reason, because his car was also out. It's not like he stayed out any longer. And it was the first lap.
I will say also, after that crash, there was a factor that does come into play here, which was that it was stated, because Checo was involved in that Monaco crash, if Checo crashed again, they would not be able to bring their planned upgrades for the rest of the season due to the cost. So Kevin Magnussen was not even in this race, but he did affect that overall situation.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
And that makes today a whole lot more interesting.
Yeah, so Kevin Magnussen being out of this race actually affected a number of things, I think, because you look back, Monaco, he should have gotten a race ban, or people feel, obviously the FIA doesn't, but people feel that he should have gotten a race ban back in Monaco, which is the crash that kicked off these, the Deconstructor race for Checo. And then we also have the fact that Kevin Magnussen is out. Ollie Behrman comes in for his second race of Formula One for the second team that he's ever raced for, all in the same side. So very exciting to have Ollie in. And also when Kevin comes back, where he doesn't have a drive promised for next year, he will have 0 penalty points. He will be back to fresh. So there's that.
I feel like at this rate, him getting this penalty, him getting a race ban is just taking an extra power unit for him.
Yeah.
It's just fine. I don't care.
Why not?
I'm not getting in the points anyway. Slap me on the wrist. Do it.
Throw me out. Put me in jail.
Let me go to the beach near Singapore before this race.
I know. He's probably having the time of his life. So I feel like he's good. So that also gives us Ollie and Franco in this race, which is exciting. 2 rookies. However, Franco did put it in the wall during practice, but so did Charles. So
he always crashes at Baku. but then he puts it on pole.
Yeah, doing his thing. I don't know. It's a weird track for him. This is the 4th time in a row that he's put it on pole, and it's also the 4th time in a row that he has not been able to convert that pole into a win, which is a bummer. Also, I do want to get a little bit into the conversation about McLaren before we run into the race, because last week the drama was this Papaya Rules situation where they are told that they can, over the radio, Papaya Rules, you're good to race. Basically, we're told that that means that they can race clean as long as they do not crash into each other. Anything goes. Then that leads to, ironically, Charles Leclerc taking the win last week in Monza, and Lando and Oscar with a 2-3 instead of a 1-2, which also, had they taken the 1-2 last week, they would have actually already been ahead by 1 point in the Constructors' Championship going into Baku. They also are continuing to not close that gap to Max for Lando for the World Championship, for the Drivers' Championship. And this week, ahead of the race, we're told that that's not what we're doing anymore. No more Papaya Rules. We are going to be prioritizing Lando. But then there's also a significant amount of confusion about what that actually means, which I'm curious to see how you felt about, because here are the different responses when asked. First, they say that we will be prioritizing Lando. Zach Brown says that they still have 2 number 1 drivers, but will sort of lean towards Lando for the next few races. No, okay, fine. Then Andrea Stella says that Oscar would give up a win if asked. Then Oscar says he would give up a win, though it would be painful. Then Lando says he wouldn't expect Oscar to give up a win, but they would swap for a 2-3 if they were in a 2-3 position like they had been in Monza. So who knows what the actual new prioritization rules are?
And I think we talked about this previously, but my biggest question was what happens if Oscar Piastri continues to outperform Lando Norris? You cannot have a team prioritization system like that if he just outperforms him on performance alone.
I thought that what they meant was that if they're in a situation like they were in Monza, Lando's coming off of pole, that then Oscar makes this big dive bomb move, which then Oscar, kind of knowing that Lando's not going to defend because they could crash, gets into that space. And so I think ultimately what I thought going into this week they were trying to say was that they don't want that type of situation where they're allowing someone else to come through and overall it hurts the points of the team completely. They could have come out of there with a 1-2 versus a 2-3. Lando could have come out with a win, which would have closed that gap a little bit more. But I personally, when I saw the news, was like, I honestly think it's too late, because when you looked at, and when you looked at this week actually going into the race, which obviously didn't end up being a factor, but had Charles Leclerc won the race and had Lando not gotten up into the points, he actually would have been ahead of Lando in the Drivers' Championship. And that is because of last week. Had they been, put in these prioritization rules a little bit earlier, they would have been defending quickly off of Charles. I don't think they would have had a situation where Charles is looking at possibly creeping up on Lando in the championship, and it's rough.
I think last I saw he was 19 points behind Lando, and then Oscar is an additional 13 points behind Charles. So it's not even a big gap between them at this point, between any of them.
That's partially because they've messed around with for so much time, and I don't think mathematically Oscar has the chance to catch Max. He has the chance to potentially even things out and get ahead of Charles and get into that space. But if they had come up with these prioritization rules last week, I think they would be ahead in the Constructors' Championship, and Lando would have a little bit more of a fighting chance of possibly catching Max, versus now they need to spend the rest of the season not only chasing Max but holding off Charles.
And honestly, I think even last week that would have been a bit too late. I feel like you honestly needed to come back straight from summer break and say, nope, we're not doing this. You are serious about doing this. We have all been talking about the downfall of Red Bull since the last time Max won. What race was that? It was 7 races ago now?
I think so, yeah.
We've all been talking about this for a while. It's pretty evident that the car has fallen off. Even with Checo's performance, even if you take that to the side, the car is just not where it needs to be, and McLaren has the faster car. There might be some changes if this front wing and rear wing investigation comes to fruition, but we'll figure that out later. They should have come out of summer break with this decided and not just had them rolling up to the races like, have fun. We have 2 number 1 drivers.
Honestly, it kind of vibes like to me, the whole management strategy has been this weird situation of like a parent with 2 kids trying to treat them equally. You know what I mean? And it's like, oh, you get a race win and then you get a race win. And then like make sure your brother like feels like he was included. It's this weird, it is not like good team management. And because of that, I don't think it's just like the points that they've lost in swapping drivers or in that. It's also the points that they're losing in mental like game, because when you listen to Lando post qualifying, he was basically like, I hate it here, we're pretty much over, it's done. And then obviously that's not what happened in the race, but like his mental space is just so off. And then the celebration around Oscar is just never there because of the fact that people are like, okay, well, do you want to win this championship or not? Like that's where people are feeling. And it's like when you watch the McLaren response online also in the fan base, you're watching like, I think that fan base was so coherent and like thrilled as a team for a really long time. And then you're seeing almost like a repetition of what we saw in the Mercedes fan base with George and with Lewis, where it's like, okay, now because of the way that the team management PR strategy is coming across, it seems like you're favoring one driver over the other in a way that is perceived as unfair. Again, we don't know everything that happens in the background, blah, blah, blah. I don't know what's going on in these team meetings that they're having on Sundays, our Sunday meetings that we have to always think about. But like you're also like splitting this fan base in a way where now the Oscar fans feel like they have to defend the fact that he's a good driver, and the Lando fans feel like they're like, okay, but why does
fighting for their lives online?
Yeah. It's like, and it's across the board, it's just bad vibes versus like and I feel like that fan base was a team that was like, we love them both, we love Papaya. Like
I think that was also fine when Oscar was doing he was never doing poorly, but he was a rookie. And I think everyone took that for granted, and they thought that for people who didn't know who Oscar Piastri was before he moved into F1, it's like, oh, you're the new second driver. You are Lando's baby. He's going to be like your big brother. He's going to push you up into the ranks, but you are not going to be a competitor to him. You are there to supplement the team's points and supplement Lando's winning. And I feel like everyone came into this expecting that. And like anyone who knows Oscar Piastri from before F1, but also Mark Webber, would have like he's never like Mark Webber even said it today. He was like, Oscar is one of the best drivers I've ever worked with. And
also for people who don't know, for people who don't follow like outside of the race, Mark Webber is Oscar's manager, so that's
and his mentor.
What's going on there? Yeah,
and so he's one of the F1 greats, and he's incredibly competitive. He would never mentor someone into F1 mediocrity, and that's being mean about it. But
but it's true.
It's true.
I think like when you look at it, I also kind of feel like people thought it was like not to the same caliber, unless you're really a big Lando fan, but like they saw it in the same way they saw Lewis and Valtteri, where it's like two really good drivers, but Valtteri's always going to hand it to Lewis if necessary. And I don't believe that Oscar is willing to do that. It's interesting because I do think that like when you're willing to do that in sports, there is like a level of that's how you build a dynasty. You do focus on like the person who you think is a better out of the two competitor or out of the five, depending on like, you know, what sport you're at. And that's the only way that you can really build this level of dynasty that we've seen like Mercedes be able to do, or Ferrari in their run, or with Max. Like that whole situation with Daniel Ricciardo was because of the fact that he wasn't willing to play second fiddle. But if Daniel Ricciardo had been willing to play second fiddle, we could be talking about a very different situation with the Constructors' Championship right now. Maybe. I don't know. But
2021 would have been different. Like
exactly. Yeah.
2021 probably like, well, yes, Max won, but like he probably would have actually won a lot earlier in this season.
I think that is what McLaren is lacking. They haven't decided who it is that they want to put all their full force behind. And I don't feel like if the Drivers' Championship is important to you, which I think it is, it's why it exists. Yeah. It's like if that Drivers' Championship is important to you, you have to make that type of decision. And they just across the board are not willing to make it. Obviously, it didn't come into play this week.
Carlos and Checo crashed. But like say that hadn't happened and he had gotten up to P3, P4 even. Like what's the decision that's going to be made here? Is Oscar supposed to slow Charles back or Carlos, whichever one of them was behind, and possibly lose that win to get Lando higher up in the points possibly? Like how, like what are the dynamics here? Because at which point is it not possible or not feasible for him to just give up a win or put the team first over his own possible race win.
Yeah, I think annoyingly we won't know until next race, and that's assuming that everything's back on track. And we should mention the reason why none of this came into play is because Lando was knocked out of Q1 due to a yellow flag. I will say it seems very confusing. Yeah, it seems very confusing as to whose fault that was, because if you listen to the radio, Lando sees the yellow flag and he asks us if he can finish. They tell him no and to come in, but it also seems by the commentators and a couple of other things that if he had crossed the line, he would have been fine and he would have moved on to Q2. And I saw some people saying that they were probably worried about a potential penalty that would have been a grid drop, but I don't know how much more of a grid drop there is for P17 that's going to be a big deal.
P17 was almost the back of the grid this week.
Right, like it's like he was fine. So that one is just odd. Like Lando basically in post-quality interviews was adamant that there was a yellow flag indicator on his steering wheel, and so he knew he had to slow down to avoid Ocon. Then he asks over the radio, "Can I finish?" And they basically tell him, "No, come in." Had he finished, I'm pretty sure even with the slowdown, his time would have brought him into Q2.
Yeah, agreed.
So very odd.
It was weird. Did you see Alex Albon's big issue?
Yes. With the fan.
But did you see the video from inside the Williams garage? That made it worse almost.
It did.
To me at least. Because I was like, the mechanic almost lost a foot, to be fair.
I think the person, and again, I don't necessarily who's necessarily at fault, but from the video it looks like the guy who waves him out was at fault, because Alex obviously can't see behind him and can't see that people still have their hands on the car. And it was also really visible that the guy was still trying to take the fan off. Like, I was a little shocked by it.
And the fact that he got all the way down to the end of the pit lane and then had to take it off himself, try to launch it off the side, and then he couldn't get back around in time to have an extra lap. Yeah. It's just sucky for them.
It sucks. I will say Alex's attitude about it was very, I thought very professional, because he basically was like, at most I would have moved up 1 or 2 positions and it wouldn't have had a really big effect. I also did want to explain, because I saw some people asking, the reason why they told him not to let the marshal touch the car is that then it would be an assist. So he basically, once you come out into that space, it's the same as like if you get caught in the gravel and you need to be assisted, like you no longer are in qualifying at that point. So he had to himself take the van off and clear the car, and then they can pick it up. It's a weird rule, but it is how it works. He just had to throw it clear of his car, and then they can pick it up. So that's what happened. Also, did you catch the picture, like the video of them, like the literal dry ice flying off the car while he was driving? I was so stressed.
I was sitting, because I was on the train when I was watching quali. So I kept getting like intermittent video, and then all of a sudden I just see like Alex Albon stopped on the side, and I was like, what just happened? Why is there a flag?
But yeah. So as we said earlier, a couple of last things. Charles takes his 4th Baku pole in a row. Oscar takes P2 behind Charles. And then the Lewis Mercedes power unit issues means that Lewis has to start from the pit lane.
Because they changed his power unit and his suspension. But the thing is, I don't know if you saw the list from the FIA. Every single driver this season is going to end up with a penalty drop because of the power unit changes. Because if they're not already had the 5th one, they're at 4.
Yeah.
Which is insane to me.
It's wild, because it also shows that it's like an issue across the board. It's not just one team where that usually is the situation. And it's pretty rare that we would have everybody at risk for this big of a grid penalty. And also with this many races left, like everyone will end up taking it, and it'll just be strategic as to when you want to take it.
And I'm actually betting a lot of them might be next week, depending on how people qualify, because at the end of the day, or not even how they qualify, but just how they feel going into the race, because you can't really overtake that well in Singapore.
Yeah.
You can, but it's not the best.
Singapore is a great race, though. I am excited for Singapore. We get some excitement. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it'll be, because it's also the question of like, when you basically, I think each team will have to look at whether or not they think their car is best suited to which track. And I think they'll take the power unit they'll take the power unit penalty wherever they feel their car is least suited to points. So so that'll be interesting to see. And then we do have to talk about George Russell, the witch, because...
What did he do?
So after quali, right?
Yes.
He qualifies fifth. He's asked, what is the best case scenario for you tomorrow? And he says, the top 4 crash and we win.
I thought I was bad with the manifestation, but George Russell, I need someone to go talk with him about this black magic he's using in the pit lane, because that's not okay.
It's also because, like, my favorite part about it is, like, the interviewer sort of goes, oh, ha ha ha. Okay, but, like, what's the best case scenario? And he just, like, deadpans and is like, that is the best case scenario. Like, the top 4 people crash and I win the race. Like
it is Baku. It could happen, especially like, considering what happened at F2. Like,
it is pretty wild. I was like, I saw that after the case. I didn't see the interview before the race. I saw the interview after, and I was like, are you a witch?
Can you predict the future?
I think he's a witch. So I guess, do we call him a witch or a warlock? Warlock doesn't feel right. It feels like witchy behavior. You know what I mean? And then on the flip side of bad magic, Will Smith, everybody that he talked to had a bad race this weekend. He was pictured with Lewis Hamilton. Pictured with Lewis Hamilton. He was in the Ferrari garage. So both of our Ferrari drivers had a rough weekend.
Charles had a great weekend.
Charles should have won this race. Charles did not have a great weekend. Charles did not have a great weekend. Fair. Charles was touched by Will Smith and it ruined everyone's life. So we're putting that out there.
That's fair. Fair. I'll take it.
Pictured with Lewis, Ferrari doesn't finish the race. One of the Ferraris does not finish the race, and the other Ferrari should have won the race. So I just want to put that out there. A lot of witch behavior happening in Baku this weekend.
Keep him away from your drivers if he comes to any additional races this season.
I feel like he was there to promote the boat racing E1 series, but
did you stay like involved in that, or have you kind of just fallen off with that?
I'm still intrigued by it, but they make it kind of difficult to actually attend a race. For anyone who doesn't know what the E1 series is, Jordan's laughing because I got for about a week I got deeply obsessed with it when I first found out about it. Yeah, maybe like 3 weeks, whatever. It was worth a deep level of obsession.
It was fine.
So basically, the E1 series is an electric boat racing series. It's not yacht racing. It's not like Sail GP. It is an electric boat. But their goal, like, this is like a stated goal of the series, is to like save the environment. I'm not really clear as to how that goal is being accomplished. But every team is owned by a celebrity, including Will Smith, Steve Aoki, Tom Brady. There are definitely people I'm forgetting. There's a cricket star. So there's like somebody from every little walk of life. These teams,
Mark
Will
Anthony.
Smith also, oh yes, Mark Anthony is one of them.
I was trying to figure his name out.
Like,
I know it starts with an M. He was married to Jennifer Lopez. No.
Yeah.
Yes. J-Lo.
And now he's competing in a celebrity electric boat racing series that is aiming to save the environment. Also, he basically like the whole series kicks off. Will Smith also joined this series one race in already. So I'm not really sure how that works. Like it's the first year that they're doing it, and then they had already done a race and then Will Smith joined. Then on top of all of that, not only are they trying to like save the environment, they're also they had a race in Venice in the canals. Yeah. And I feel like that is not helping the situation in Venice, but I'm not sure. You know, I am not a celebrity millionaire with an electric boat racing series. So there could be something going on that I don't know about.
I'd be really upset if I was visiting Venice and I got splashed by like these billionaires just driving boats in circles when the tide is super high, and like I'm sitting there in my like plastic rain boots so my shoes don't get wet, and then you just get
yeah,
like
it actually ride. The thing about it is like there was a Spider-Man Tom Holland movie where they went to Venice, and now I'm imagining if E1 had been a situation, I would have loved to have seen that factor in. That's all I'll say. Just a quick note there. But can you imagine like Tom Holland and Zendaya are like fighting like, you know, they're doing their thing, and then in the midst of the battle is also the E1 boat race, and like all these celebrities have to be saved by Spider-Man. Yeah.
It's why they're there for the weekend.
It really would have worked because Tony Stark could have owned an E1 boat racing team.
He would have been
I'm going to put
great.
that out there. You know
And
what?
he passed
It's
it
a
down
movie
to
pitch.
Tom.
Oh, would have been great. So there's that. But things that are interesting about this E1 boat racing series actually is that it is completely gender equal. So every team has one male and one female driver. And also all of these drivers come from so many different like backgrounds of series. There's rally drivers, there's some Formula E drivers. There's a whole bunch of drivers that have like a wealth of really cool experience, and they're driving these boats that are honestly kind of cool. They remind me of like if you've seen the movie Triple X at the end when he's like trying to like stop the nuclear like bioweapon and he's like racing down. They kind of look like that boat that he's like on top of. It's an interesting series. It's just I should do like a full deep dive on this at some point to explain it, but it's just difficult to like understand how you can attend. So I would like to go if anyone from E1 is listening.
I think if anybody from E1 is listening, please send Marissa and please give her a +1 because I will make sure to be there and I will capture all of the content for her.
We will get off of E1 now and get back to Formula One, but I just want everyone to know that that is why Will Smith was there and why he caused a lot of problems with his energy. Apparently.
Checo has a team.
Checo Perez. That's how I found out. Okay, the reason I found out about E1 is because there was a picture of Checo Perez like talking about these boats, and there was a video of him and all these other celebrities like welcoming Will Smith to the series, and I was like, what is this? What is this? And now I know, and now I'm vaguely obsessed with it. And I want to go. I want to go to a race. Yes. So that's my story about E1. Well, you know what? Checo's a perfect way to bring back our points here. Let's get back into the F1 race where no boats were harmed in the making of this film, but a few cars were. Stop. Okay, so using Checo, we're coming back from E1, but one of the E1 team owners, Checo Perez, actually had a pretty good start of this race alongside Charles, and I was impressed, I will say. Did my impressiveness last for the rest of the race? It did not. But I will say it was kind of nice to see Checo driving so much better this week. I was very impressed by he outqualified Max. He drove very well for 99.9% of the race, and he had a great start. It was good.
And
it was
like
a good run
he was doing well in practice as well. And that was the reason I put him in P2 for my fantasy thing, because I was just delusional and I said Charles would win. I was very confident that he was going to finish. And then chaos.
Yeah. Yes.
We'll come back to that.
We'll come back to that. But I will say the first couple of laps were a little like surprising. I was surprised that Checo was able to take P3 from Carlos. Yep. I will also say that I was pleasantly surprised by Charles' start and being able to fend off Oscar. For obviously we know that didn't last, but for the race itself and the driving, I thought the start was great. And then I will say, as always, justice for Yuki. My campaign will never end.
I do not understand how that happened.
I also don't, because it was like, I watched the replay, Stroll took a puncture, and then basically like he, in doing that, hit Yuki. Yeah. I have no idea how that resulted in the side pod damage that he had, because it was wild.
Because like I saw the video after they replayed it when Yuki retired, and like, it's a pretty decent sized hole.
Yeah. So I'm not sure what caused that. I mean, ultimately Lance retired by the end of the race as well, but it at that point had not. And it was a little I always hate when like a driver causes retirement damage to another car and then they themselves can continue the race. Yeah. So it was a bummer. And this is also the second race in a row that Yuki's had some issues where he stayed out of the points. And it's always an interesting situation because right now Daniel is still fighting for a seat. Yeah. And so when we're not able to compare him directly to Yuki through no fault of Yuki's own, it's a little frustrating because I think right now, like, it's hard for me to say. I don't know that we're going to know who's going to have that V-carb seat until the season's over. And even with that being said, like, every race that we go by that Daniel doesn't get a contract renewal makes me feel like it's not going to him.
I think with Daniel, Yuki, Liam, and in turn Checo, like, I feel like the more races Yuki has where he doesn't finish, to be fair, or start really, the less he's in contention and like in the conversation for that second Red Bull seat. Yes, Checo has the seat. Yes, they've signed him for longer, but it's Red Bull. They will figure out a way.
Yeah.
They really want to. But I feel like the longer that Yuki is just not able to have solid races, but even if Daniel has a slightly better, I think he could still stay in that conversation.
I really hate to say it, but I think Yuki's never been in the conversation for that
I
second
don't
seat
think
as
so.
much as he deserves to be. Yeah. So it's
Agreed,
like,
for sure.
it's hard to say because I think like with Honda leaving and heading to Aston Martin and the whole situation with Yuki and the way that he's viewed in the Red Bull camp, I struggle to know his future. I do worry about his future in 2026 because Honda's moving to Aston Martin and Aston Martin's pretty locked down because they would have to kick out Fernando or Lance. And I don't see either of those things happening unless Max becomes a conversation.
I think Fernando's going to retire.
Not in 2026.
Yeah.
I don't think so because not with Adrian Newey coming in, not with that whole conversation of like getting to well, one, my theory is that Fernando's not retiring until Lewis does. I think that's why he's still here.
That's
but
fair.
Second
You
of
will
all,
not outdrive me.
Exactly. And so it's like that. And then secondly, I think with Fernando, he's been trying for so long to get back to being at a championship team. I think now that they have gotten Adrian Newey, the only way that Fernando leaves that team, like as a driver, obviously he signed this like quote unquote lifetime contract, which I assume means that he has places for him after he decides to retire from being a driver, whenever that is. But I just don't see, because I don't see any driver being told you can work with Adrian Newey and being like, you know what, I'm good. I miss the beach. Like it's like no, especially not Fernando, who like his life is this.
That's fair. I think next year's just gonna be crazy. I think this year is crazy. Next year's gonna be crazy. I think we're gonna lose a lot of people.
I think it's gonna be a mess. Yeah, I think. Given next year we only have 2 seats left open, the V-Carb and future Audi seats, not Audi next year, but those 2 seats are the only 2 open.
I don't think it'll be Bottas.
I'm getting more stressed every day. Let me tell you that.
The more time passes without him signing with them, the more I think it's not going to be him.
I also think it sucks because I really will be bummed to see Bottas leave, and I don't feel like he has gotten everything he deserves out of Formula One yet. And I think he still has stuff to give. And I just think after leaving Mercedes, which really kicked off such a chain reaction of everything going on with Lewis and everything going on with that team, I think since then, obviously there wasn't a place for him to go that was like a top team, and there's still not. And so it's just frustrating because I actually do feel like Valtteri can be a top driver, but he just has not had a situation where, I mean, he was a top driver with his campaign with Lewis, but Lewis was the winner.
It's comparing apples to oranges in that one. And it's just like, I feel like it was really early in Drive to Survive where he talked about that exact thing. And he was like, I don't want to be second, but I'm here and I am.
Yeah. And that's the hard part is I think being Lewis's teammate was both a gift and a curse for Valtteri because he got to be at the top of his game for so long, but he never got to be a champion in his own right. And that's just sort of like the name of the game if circumstances were different, but obviously circumstances aren't different. Yeah. There are some rumors, which leads us into Williams, that Franco's being looked at for that Audi seat.
His performance these last few weeks, I could really see that happening. He was really good this weekend, despite the crash. I understand that myself and some other people are probably still not James Vowell's apologists just yet because of how he did the whole thing with Logan. Do I think he was right to get rid of him? Yes, but I just don't like the mechanism that was used to do so.
Franco might even the other thing that I was asking people on Instagram this week is like watching Franco perform as well as he is performing is also difficult because there's nowhere for him to go. At best it's that Audi seat which like 12 people are fighting for right now. And also that I don't know what that means for his relationship with Williams. Does Williams have him under a contract that would keep him from going to another team? I don't know the particulars there. And also the other problem is all of Franco's sponsors are now committed to Williams in multi-year deals. So I don't know how that affects his chances of getting another seat with another team when he can't bring any money with him.
I think they're going to send him back to F2.
which sucks. Like,
Yeah.
to me, honestly, like, the thing of watching Franco perform as well as he did this weekend, and also honestly debut as well as he did the weekend before. Yes, he put it in the wall this weekend, but, like, can we be upset when also the guy who ends up sitting on pole puts it in the wall in the same spot? Like,
Baku's a
there's only
notoriously difficult circuit. Him putting
right,
it in the wall is just like, cool, this will be the first time in your hopefully very long career where you are going to put it in the wall at Baku.
right.
I think every single person has done that.
And what's frustrating is that, like, when you look at it, I'm like, you spent all of this time, this public effort and behavior chasing after Carlos Sainz, when it turns out you guys had someone who had all of the money, all of the talent, and came for a lot less money and effort, just sitting in F2 waiting to be promoted. And it's like, instead of, like, me personally, this is just a preference. I love Carlos. Think Carlos is great. Would have much rather have seen Carlos go to Audi for all his buku dollars and have Franco come and be like the rookie at Williams and watch Franco and Alex build that team up together. I would so much rather that narrative than Carlos Sainz comes in as the star and saves the team, which is the narrative that James Vowles has started to spin. And everything's about PR, everything's about, the way that everything looks, but I just, to me, I would have rather watched Carlos go be the star of another factory team, like go be with a car manufacturer, go smile and be pretty next to an Audi R8, like vibes, like all of that's fine. And then let Williams keep the energy that Williams has, which is this like underdog building up team, which they had a great race story this weekend.
And like Alex, to be fair, is not going to take lightly to somebody just coming in to his team, the team that he has built up into what it is in truth.
Yeah.
And then be like, okay, shoot, we
right.
want to make this new person our number one driver.
Well, I also think you can see that tension already starting to build when you saw what Alex said when Logan left. When Alex posted for Logan leaving, he said he referenced the fact that the same thing happened to him at Red Bull.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is a red flag. It's a danger Will Robinson situation if you're Alex Albon. They are not only willing to bring someone in that has a bigger profile than you, that's going to be your new number one after locking you into a contract, making you think you're the future of the team. Then
after
not only that,
you're the future of the team.
Right. Giving all of this press saying it. Not only that, but they are also willing to kick someone to the curb mid-season, which happened to you at a much higher stakes. Like, if I'm Alex, I'm stressed and I don't feel good about my position.
Because Williams is trying to give Red Bull 2017, 2018 vibes. But they are not that team. They don't have the profile for it. And like Red Bull has always had that vibe behind them. But Williams was always built around the idea of family and the concept of family. And for Carlos to come in is fine. But the whole Logan thing and just getting rid of him in the way that they do, it just pushes people who would have been in the family away. It's like, even if he sucked, just let him stay the rest of the season. Or if you're going to get rid of him mid-season, do it in a better way.
I'm curious for you, post this race, would you rather have seen Franco in Williams next year than Carlos? Not if Carlos had to leave. I'm not saying Carlos had to leave F1 because he did have other options. If it came down to Carlos on another team and Franco at Williams.
I would rather have Franco at Williams. Because I think it's a better space for him rather than another team. He's in their driver academy. It makes sense. And like for someone like Carlos, it never really made sense. Like Williams makes sense, but it never sat right with me. Because like Carlos and Alex, they probably get on very well, but like they have very different driving styles. They have very different ways of approaching the car. And I wonder how much of that is just going to turn into friction that's going to mess them up as the team is trying to rebuild, because there's so many operational problems.
Agreed. I also would have liked to have seen Franco there. I think watching Lewis stuck behind rookies for a period of time was honestly kind of cool. I obviously, as a big Lewis fan, I always want him to be in the best position, but I love watching the best of the generation that's on their way out, like right next to the generation of the people who are coming in, and Ollie and Franco, they are doing so much more than you could ever ask of rookies. Ollie's had 2 race weekends, so is Franco. This is Ollie's first full race weekend where he was in FP1 all the way through. Also, Ollie did make some history as the first rookie to score points in both races for 2 different teams. I love when people are like, he made history, and I'm like, how many people had that possible configuration of events? But it's still very impressive, and I thought it was sweet to like see Lewis like congratulate the 2 of them after the race. He shook the hand. It was very sweet. And I also think like that's something with Formula One that is really specific because they can drive for much longer, so you can have someone like, this is Lewis's 3rd rookie class generation that's like, I grew up watching Lewis Hamilton and that's the reason I drive. It must be. Ooh. So I think it's cool because you have Lewis and Fernando, who are like rivals, hate each other. They have like this amazing story behind them of having been there before the cars went into hybrids, and like doing all these different situations where like they have so much history of Formula One. And then you have like the generation after them, like the George Russells, the Lando Norrises, that class that was like, I grew up watching Lewis. Like you have so many cute photos. Yeah, he's my idol. You have so many cute photos of like those drivers like kind of like standing off to the side in the garage, like watching Lewis do interviews, and they're like, oh my God, wait, I'm an F1 driver too. Like, that's very sweet. And then you have this new generation of like literal children. You have Kimi and like also Lewis's relationship with Kimi Antonelli. Like there's gonna be this new class of like literal 18-year-olds that are coming in, and how, I don't know, I love it. There's something really nice about it.
It's adorable. But it's also like weird.
Yeah, definitely weird, but adorable. Let's talk about Williams not in the negative light. I do want to point at like how let's talk about Williams and what they did right, which is
so many things right.
It was a shockingly good race for them. The thing that was cool to watch with Alex was how long he was able to hold that 3rd position and like really cover off. And especially without having been on a pit stop, he was able to like keep drivers off that had been on fresher tires. And then you also have Lando kind of ultimately, they sort of faked out their little pit stop, and that sent Alex into the pits to go ahead and do his pit stop a little bit earlier than he maybe necessarily had to. But that being said, both Franco and Alex finished in the points. I was very happy for them. All of my issues being said. But I guess that's my point. I was like, you know what? I want to watch this all of next season. These 2 drivers working in the way that they're working with this team. I want to watch that. I want to watch Franco be silly. I want to watch him be a kid. I really desperately would love to see them do a podcast together the way that Logan and Alex were doing. They would be so fun. I don't know that I'm going to see Carlos and Alex do that next year.
No, it doesn't seem like their thing.
I'm all for a likable Williams that finishes 2 cars in the points. Would have loved to have seen that.
I want Williams' family back together, not Williams' disparate back together.
Agreed. We also should probably talk about the Lando drive because quite honestly, despite how negative he was coming into this, he ends up P15 instead of P17 after some disqualifications and grid penalties for power unit replacements. He finishes P4, which would have been P6, but still P4. And he pulled off a very impressive large stint on hard tires, even though he clearly, him and Lewis both complained about being on the hard tires for as long as they were.
For a while.
Long drive. And I think also, and it was the right move, it just never ended up panning out the way they wanted it to. They were waiting for a safety car, and the safety car just ended up coming too late.
At lap 51.
Yeah, so we'll get there. But a couple of things I do want to talk about with Lando's drive. Number 1, he was actually asked to cover for Oscar at lap 16, which I will be honest with you, I have seen a lot of people complaining about this online. It did not affect where he placed. It was a team move, and like you can only they do have 2 championships to figure out right now. They do need to focus on constructors. When you're starting P15 and your teammate is starting P2, there's going to be a teammate move. It's a different situation. So that's not like Papaya Rules being reinstated. It's like genuine race strategy. So I do want to put that out there because I saw so many people being like, how can we say we're prioritizing him and then we're asking him to hold off Perez for Oscar? It's like, yeah, because Oscar's P2 and there's quite literally no way that Lando's fighting his way through the field.
It was like
maybe
laps.
It was like maybe 2 seconds. It was really not like it was and also not only was it 1 or 2 seconds, it was
enough.
yeah, it was enough to help Oscar not have to deal with Checo. I do want to point out also that had this moment not happened, we also most likely would not have seen the crash that we saw because Checo would have been further out. He would not have been anywhere close to Carlos. Carlos wouldn't have been able to catch up. And it's actually highly possible that you would have had a 1-2-3 fight and that Oscar may have lost that win. So I want to put that out there because I think that couple of seconds of teammate playing really put McLaren overall in a better position and ultimately gave them a much bigger lead in constructors, given the fact that one didn't. Yeah. Well, also Red Bull didn't finish with one of their cars. Yeah, so I think, you know, it was an important move that actually ended up being quite pivotal to the race.
And on top of it, like Lando still needed to pit. It's not like they were asking him, can you hold him up after he had just finished a pit stop or where he was in the middle of a stint. He needed to come in anyway.
Also, if you listen to the radio message, they specifically said without sacrificing your own race, can you hold him up, which he did. So I think it was a fair enough teammate play.
Absolutely.
And it was important. So that being said, on the complete flip side, I do want to talk about the fact that I want to know if McLaren went to some sort of team bonding like retreat, because the way they speak over the radio, I think I wrote down the message that they wrote. Think of Andrea on your shoulder.
That was weird. I was like, what?
I wrote, think perhaps of no longer speaking in riddles. What? Like, I get it, but my thing is like, I don't get it actually. This is like a weird, maybe it's something that like Lando has asked for. Maybe he's like, you know what really keeps me on my toes when I'm driving 200 miles an hour around a racetrack? When you give me a riddle to solve. Like basically all they were saying was like tire management, no spin on the outside. That's all they were asking was manage your tires. But also like, I do not understand why they continue to like, I literally feel like they went to like a team building exercise where someone was like, please, you know how they're like, oh, instead of saying you did, say I feel. Like, it's like a weird, and like it's therapy. A radio. Yeah, just say, please watch your tire. Like, what are we doing?
I think that's just Lando's side of the garage though, because like I don't really hear them do that much with Oscar.
No, same. That's why I'm like, I don't understand what's going on. But yeah, I think you're right. I don't see that same like riddle behavior happening on Oscar's side of the garage. So at the same time, I do wonder like why Lando is being spoken to this way. Again, there's so much that we don't know and so much that we don't hear. Maybe there's a reason for it, but it's over and over. Like we had a couple of weeks ago, we had this like, think of who you're racing, or do you know who you're racing right now?
You're going to need him later on.
Yeah, think of our Sunday meetings. Like it's just literally ever since Hungary, we've just had like Riddle City. I literally feel like his race engineer is like the Riddler. I don't get it.
I feel like a mom.
So it's very odd. But regardless of that, he did end up having a very great race. Honestly, he goes P15 to P4. He does overtake Max, which is important. And then also he does get fastest lap. Max does pit to take the fastest lap back, but out of sheer luck, the virtual safety car keeps Max from getting another lap in. So he does bring that gap down to 59 points, which
not bad.
I think, yeah, not bad. I'm curious how you feel about Lando and his potential, because his attitude versus his performance is really interesting to me. He always has such a negative outlook on how things are going. And then he does put in these drives where you're like, I don't really like to compare anyone to Lewis, but like certain times we talk about Lewis Hamilton and the way that he is able to move through the field when he has a bad situation. We saw the same thing from him starting from the pit lane and getting into the points. Lando also comes from P15 up to P4. Like we are seeing him perform much better than he seems to believe he can. And I don't know if it's that he like has to psych him, like does he have to like neg himself to get into the mental space to be able to race? Like, so yeah.
I think with Lando, I think his head's not in it, but I also think I think performance wise, it would be different if Ferrari wasn't right there. And if when Mercedes has their stuff together, like that Mercedes is also kind of right behind McLaren. I think it messes with his head because he's got a lot of pressure on him right now, because at the end of the day, people keep saying, you're the closest challenger to Max. You're the closest challenger to Max. If you win every race from between here and now, you'll win by a point. I think he used to win by an average of 8 or 9 points on top of Max every.
He has a gap of 59 points to Max. There's 7 race weekends left. 3 of them are sprint race weekends, which I want to point out because that does change how many points are on the table. But he needs to move by 8.42 points ahead per weekend. So going into this race weekend, it was just under 8 points that he needed to do. So he obviously did not hit that same gap. But the points that are on the table would be obviously race wins. There's 3 sprint races, and on top of that, you could also have the fastest lap each race. So like there is still mathematically a possibility for him to do it, but it's not an easy situation. And again, I think that's where that conversation about like how long it took for McLaren to put this strategy in of race wins and who's important. If you look at Hungary and you look at Monza, the number of points that they have given to Oscar, like that they've sacrificed to Oscar winning versus Lando winning, that berth would be a significantly different situation.
We'll see how this turns out.
Yeah. But speaking of Oscar, I will say I also thought that he outdrove Charles this weekend. Which was
absolutely.
Really, honestly, very impressive. Like he takes the lead at lap 20 after basically an undercut in the pit stop, which I don't know that anything's come out now, but at the point of like post-race press conference, Ferrari really didn't seem to understand how they lost as much time as they did in that undercut, because it was a 6-second lead and it dropped down to 1.6 by the time that Oscar had come out from his pit stop. It's like a pretty rough drop that doesn't really, there's something else missing there that they haven't figured out what the issue was. And then Oscar pulls his move in lap 20 and then genuinely holds that race for the rest of the race. And quite honestly, in my opinion, Charles had a couple of opportunities to make a move, and he just never made an aggressive move. Yeah.
Like Oscar's a very good defensive driver. He will make you work for it. You're not just going to sail past. You're not just going to like be handed the win. He's going to make you work for it.
I also think I want to point out the other reason why Oscar being prioritized or not being prioritized in this whole conversation with Lando is that Oscar is a different driver than he was at the beginning of this season. Lando was very much out driving Oscar at the beginning of the season. I think there were points where Lando had so much more pace than Oscar did in the same vehicle. I think like also there were points where Oscar was letting people pass him and he wasn't really like taking that mentality of defensive driving or also taking these really big risky moves like he did on Lando and Monza and like he did on Charles this weekend. These like inside cuts where these 2 moves, these last 2 weekends for him, I really think are like these moves where he is playing chicken with the other driver. Are you going to brake and cover off, or are you going to risk crashing into me?
He calls their bluff.
Yeah. But that is not the same Oscar we had at the beginning of this season. And I think
it changed after Hungary.
I think he woke up and like, or I don't know if it's that he woke up or if it's that he's been like silently plotting, that he's been working on his game and also has been able to do so very quietly because of how much focus has been on Lando getting his first win and having so much kind of focus on him starting at Miami. If Oscar had been the one to win first when McLaren was starting to like pull out the car that they've pulled out, it would be a completely different conversation.
It would be crazy. Like if that safety car, I think about that safety car in Miami. If that safety car in Miami had happened at a different point or just had not happened at all, my thought is that we would probably be questioning whether or not Oscar Piastri could win the Drivers' Championship this year.
I don't know if we would be at the point that Oscar would be close enough to Max, because I think Max would have won Miami had there not, well, it's hard to say, as Max says, if, but I think like it's hard to say that Oscar would have been at the same level, but I do think that Oscar has been able to stay out of the conversation and focus on himself very quietly. And then obviously I think Lando is dealing with quite a bit of mental struggle against the amount of pressure that's on him and this level. And I also think when you watch like his press conferences before this week, you have these questions being asked. Yeah. Well, it's also, you have these questions being asked of basically like, do you think your team hates you? Like, do you think your team even cares if you win? Or do you think like they just don't want you here? That's like the mentality of like the questions. And so it's like, that's going to slip into your mindset as well of like,
of course.
Does my team hate me? Like, and I think there are so many little things, because it's like, now you have that sort of back of mind situation down to what was most likely just an honest mistake or confusion in him dropping out of Q3, but does it sit in the back of his head the way that the conversation online is, which is, did they do it on purpose? Do they hate you? And it's just a nonstop situation.
And we know that Lando is chronically online.
Yes, we do know that Lando needs to get off his phone. But it's this on the same flip side though, like I do really think that it is a mirror of what was happening at Mercedes early on this season, because you had the same problem with Lewis. Does my team hate me? Do they want me to like just continue to fail? I never expect to out-qualify George. It's a smaller version of what's happening over there and that we're seeing repeated in McLaren, but it's still there. And I think it's something that's stuck in your head versus for Oscar. It's now he's been able to quietly focus on himself and be there to prove himself to be the better driver should the opportunity arise.
Absolutely.
So I found myself getting annoyed because I really wanted to see like exciting race. Like when I was thinking about it and I was like, I feel like I need a Red Bull hat, a McLaren shirt, and my Ferrari jacket because I just want good competition. But at the same time, I was like, I almost just for that same point, like for the competition, I wanted Charles to win the race because of how big of a competition that becomes for the top three. It's still a possibility. It's still like a situation where they have to deal with it. But had Charles won the race, and also
that would have been stellar.
It was so good. And also, I was just, my thing about it, I was like, I really do wish we had seen him. And he said this himself later. He made two misjudgments. One, not expecting the undercut with the loss of the 6-second lead. And two, not fighting Oscar enough.
Not defending.
And he should have. And I really wish we had seen that. And I wish we had at least seen him take one risky move in that final last kind of 10-lap run. And he never did.
Not a one.
At the same time, we see his teammate get stuck in a risky situation, which obviously would have been worse. So let's talk about that. Carlos and Checo's crash. At that point, I was like, were you guys just bored? Like, what was this crash? Because if you look at the move, I do think, obviously, there was no further action taken, which did surprise me from the stewards because I did think it was Checo's fault.
You thought it was Checo's fault?
Yeah, I did. If you look at the space, like, I thought Carlos had fully passed him. And then if you look at, like, the way that Checo's coming up and Carlos is moving back onto the racing line, it's like, Checo's the one who had the visibility to see that there was a crash about to happen.
Yes.
And had he moved, he should have hit the brakes. And this is also not the first time that a crash this season has been caused by Checo seeing that he had the opportunity to not crash and crashing anyway. And then being like, why does everyone hate me? It's like, because what are you talking about? Like, you did it.
It's Exhibit A, Exhibit B.
Yeah. So, and I don't think, I mean, obviously the stewards ultimately decided that they both could have stopped the crash, and that's fine. And it just looked from my vantage point, I was like, we only have so much vantage point on TV, but like Carlos had made a good move. He had passed him. Checo was trying desperately to get his position back, which I get, as he should have been. But then at that point, when you look at the way that they crashed, like, Carlos is moving back on. It was so like odd. It was so needless. Yeah, I did as well. Actually,
so loud.
Yeah,
my partner had to close the window, and I was like, "Sorry."
It was like, "Are you well?" Like, no, I'm not. Actually, I cannot believe this just happened to me. Did you watch the onboards after?
Yeah.
Did you see?
I didn't see a head push, but I saw him go, like, gave him a talking to.
So it's weird because obviously Twitter is a light trying to decide what happened and what didn't happen. But there is this like noise that you can hear, and you do see him touch Carlos's helmet.
Oh, really?
I don't think it was as dramatic as people have been making it out. Like, because if you look at the conversation, they're like, Checo pushed Carlos's head, and you never push someone's head after a crash like that and whatever. It really is like a very small, the little noise, it really sounds like he just probably bopped his helmet, which obviously like not cute behavior. And also me personally, I always feel like there should be like a, are you okay prior to being mad at each other, but it is what it is. Checo clearly
was really upset because that would have been a P3, possible P2 for him. And like, he's been so bad all season. He's struggled so hard all season. And like, regardless of whose fault it was, like, they just crashed. And it's like, all of that work that he put in this weekend for nothing. I get why he's livid. I would be.
I get the anger. I really do. But I also am like, I think sometimes I really do try to give like the benefit of the doubt in sporting situations, actually, because I think you're at just like the height of your possible emotions at like such an intense space. So I do feel like that's a situation where it's like, okay, that's going to happen. You're going to make decisions that you probably shouldn't. You're going to, you know, say something you shouldn't, whatever. I do also think though, like with Checo in particular, he's under a lot of pressure that we've kind of quietly gotten rid of, because there was so much of a conversation going into summer break, like, are they going to get rid of him? And then the response being like, they only didn't get rid of him because of the Austin and Mexico City races, and they still could get rid of him before the end of the year, which I don't really see happening at this point. But I do think that there is still this conversation about next year and like whether or not he belongs on the team. And I do think this crash, whether or not it's his fault, as it's been ruled that it wasn't, I think when you're a driver of this caliber and you know what is on the line and you also understand the cost of crashing your car, you have to bail out from that type of situation, even if you think it is Carlos's fault, because Red Bull now is looking at it and they're saying, we cannot bring upgrades that we need. We cannot bring planned upgrades that we need because of the cost of this crash.
I don't know if you saw them in the wall, but like his whole, like the car is totaled. Like they're going to spend so much money just rebuilding his car specifically, because like, yes, Carlos's car has a lot of damage, but it's probably not nearly as much as Checo's car.
Yeah, Checo's was definitely worse. And I think that's because the impact of it was him
wall side.
In the wall side, and also the front of the car, which is a little bit more fragile than the back, which Carlos took more damage in the back, I think. I think the problem for Checo is that like at this point, he's arguably the reason why they've now been passed. When you look at the constructor situation now, they should have basically, McLaren would have passed them regardless, I think, with the way that things finished. But it's obviously a much larger gap now. With Checo not finishing the race, McLaren ends up passing by 20 points in the Constructors' Championship. And that is a pretty big gap. Had they not had the situation that they had in Monza last week, they would have already been up by 1 point, actually. And that would have been an even larger gap that they now would be expanding. And it's rough because you're looking at now Red Bull is the way that the point standing is. We're at 476 for McLaren, 456 for Red Bull, and 425 for Ferrari. So you actually have Ferrari kind of sneaking up behind Red Bull. And there's like there is a situation and a possibility where Ferrari ends up taking second to McLaren and Red Bull falls to third.
That'll happen.
You think so?
Yeah, I think so. Where do you think that'll end up?
I think it is highly possible that we see what I'm actually excited about is that I think Abu Dhabi this year is going to be like a to the finish line situation.
I know.
The same way that it was for Mercedes and Red Bull. I mean, Mercedes and Ferrari last year. I think it's possible that we're looking at that for constructors this year.
I agree with you. Where do you think they'll finish for the top three in the constructors?
I think McLaren will win constructors. Actually, let me take that back. McLaren will win constructors if they can keep their shit together for the rest of the last 7 races. I think like they have to, at that point, both of their drivers have to agree on whatever the strategy is. Both sides of the garage have to agree on what the strategy is, and they have to stick to it. Whether that means that one driver is sad and the other one isn't, I don't care. There has to be a real strategy that they stick to, and they cannot have another situation like they did in Q1, which again, you can't control a safety car situation. You can't control a yellow flag. However, they should have gone out earlier. They should have looked at the way the timing was coming through. Like, you can control the fact that you hadn't put a time in, knowing that it was possible for something on a track like Baku where things do happen like this. Like, that was my issue with it, was that strategically they should have already put in a better time. They should not have left it to a situation where they only had time for one more lap.
Not having a bigger lap is dumb.
Yeah. So that was wild to me. So we can't have those types of situations anymore. And I don't know that I feel confident that McLaren won't have any more mistakes throughout the entirety of the situation. I think for McLaren to win, they have to literally go home after Baku. They have to sit down and they all have to agree. And nobody can falter and nobody can make any more mistakes. And that's on both sides. That's for winning constructors and for Lando to have a shot at Drivers' Championship. I think the other thing that can help McLaren is the fact that Red Bull, with this crash, now has given them a much bigger like points berth for constructors. And also they're going to have trouble in terms of being able to continue to upgrade their car, whereas McLaren has the ability to continue to upgrade their car. So I think that makes it harder for Red Bull to get back to fighting form, basically. And then with Ferrari, I think if Ferrari can like maintain what they're doing and get to the point that both drivers are scoring higher, what I think Ferrari has that McLaren has not had is the fact that those two drive like teammates. Carlos, if Carlos believes Charles has a chance at winning Drivers' Championship, he will do everything he can to help.
He's going to be Charles's Checo 2021.
Yes. And I think when you look at that, like I think what's really nice about the two of them is like we've heard rumors that they don't necessarily get along. We've seen them get along, but I think also when you're directly competing against someone in that way, the best you can ask for is that we most of the time look like we get along. Like I don't know that you can be best friends with your direct teammate in Formula One. I think but we saw that with Nico and Lewis. It's just not a possible situation. No. I think when you look at like how Valtteri and Lewis interact with each other now, they are like so much more friendly than they were when they were teammates, because obviously like it's a totally different situation. So I think with Carlos and Charles, the big thing there is that like even if they are not necessarily the best of friends, they do get along well enough to do press together, and they do drive like teammates. When you look at Monaco, you look at the way that Carlos was like, this is Charles's race, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that he wins it, and he did help. You also look at Monza, and you look at Carlos being asked to hold off, and he did the same, like not hold off in terms of winning the race himself, but hold off the McLarens. He did like drive defensively for Charles, and that did help him win, and it did also cause Carlos to fall further back. You know, it's a situation where I think the two of them are willing to drive like teammates, and I think if the reverse was happening and Carlos was the one with the opportunity, Charles would be doing the same thing for him.
I agree. And even today, I do think that part of Carlos's move was strategic to get on the podium, but it also was to put more pressure on Checo to leave Charles alone with his tires falling off.
Absolutely.
So it just ended up poorly for them.
Yeah. So, and again, it's one of those situations where I don't think Carlos, when you saw Carlos's response, he literally was like, what just happened?
What just happened?
Like fully. And they were like, are you okay? He's like, yeah, I'm fine, but like what just happened? Like I'm confused. So it seemed like everyone was okay. It didn't seem like any either of them were injured or anything like that.
No, they said they were fine.
Yeah. So I think ultimately when you look at it, I think that crash may be the reason that Red Bull falls to third.
Agreed.
We will see. What I want ultimately is I want at Abu Dhabi, Max, Lando, and Charles fighting it out to the end. I want drama. I want a possibility of anybody could take it.
I want Red Bull to make one of those McLaren flexi wings before the end of the season.
I am curious to see whether or not that investigation will cause problems.
I think it will. Because I think so? Oh yeah, for sure. Like there's a video someone showed today of like them going around Baku, the same place, same level camera, like putting a grid over it. And you can just see how much flex the rear wing of the McLaren has going at Baku at full tilt versus a Ferrari. And it's night and day. Like I'm not an engineer and I could see it.
Be interesting to see. Obviously, we know that Charles did not ultimately pass Oscar. It is a completely non-Red Bull podium. It's also a young podium.
It's the first time that everyone on the podium is an F2 champion.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah.
Wow.
F2 posted about it post-race. I was like, oh, love that little tidbit of information.
What a fun little stat. Good for them. There was also post-race, I think I did say this earlier, but Max did pit to try to get that fastest lap. And the virtual safety car that was caused by Checo and Carlos's crash means that Max was not able to put in another lap. However, he, along with 4 other cars, were called into the steward's office for passing under a virtual safety car, but everyone ultimately was just issued a warning. I think because so many people did it, it's like, what were they going to do? Yeah. So that was an interesting, I don't know. I saw people being like, do we really think that there's going to be like a time penalty? Which obviously there ultimately wasn't. But I think it would have been, if it was only one person, they probably would have issued a penalty, but it's hard to issue a penalty when it's happened with 4 full cars. It was Pierre, Esteban, Max, and Nico that were all called in for this same violation. All of them were ultimately issued a warning, which I think is fair because of the fact that it happened with so many people. It's like, it's difficult to give those types of penalties, and also to give like, I think when you give penalties that don't ultimately affect the race, but do affect the standings and affect the championship standings in a situation like this, I think is kind of, it's one of the few times where I'm like, yeah, it's like the FIA made the right decision.
After 2021, you can't. Like with Lando and Max being so close, you can't.
Yeah, it just becomes one of those situations where it's just like, it's, I think there's like this idea of like the spirit of racing and like the interpretation of the rules and how things should be done, and it's like, you don't want a championship to be affected by a technicality in that way. No. Similarly to the same fact that like McLaren took they did get a $5,000 fine for a pit lane violation, but like, thankfully that wasn't a time penalty. I also think you don't want to see a race like this end in Oscar losing his win because of that. And it's like, but it's also one of those things where it's like, because Charles didn't outdrive him, like it would suck to have seen Oscar like demoted to P2 and Charles getting the win just because of a pit lane infringement.
Was he less than 5 seconds behind him?
No, I think ultimately with the virtual safety car, it was like a 10-second gap. So he would have been fine either way, but it still would have been like I think it still would have been odd
close
to
for comfort.
Yeah, situation. So I think going into the rest of the season, we've got 7 races left, 3 sprints on top of that. There are a number of championship points still on the table. We've got Red Bull with the inability to do upgrades and a lot of damage that they've taken, and also a full 20-point gap now to McLaren for constructors, and Ferrari creeping in. We've got Charles creeping in on the race as well for driver championship. So all of that being said, it puts us in the end of the episode, which is, any predictions or hot takes for the rest of the season?
Rest of the season, I think Charles Leclerc has a chance to beat Lando Norris in terms of who finishes second in the Drivers' Championship. But I do think that Max will win only because there are multiple teams in the fight for this win, and it might just provide him enough cover to stay if people can consistently get rid of P1 or P2. My hot take for the season is I think that Oscar Piastri will win a Drivers' Championship before Lando Norris, but that is not going to happen this year. Maybe next year.
I think it really depends on how McLaren behaves, if we're being honest. I think here's my thing about the rest of the season. I think that Charles has the possibility to put enough pressure on Lando to keep either of them from winning champion. I agree with that. I do also think that Max wants it more than Lando in a different way.
Agreed.
If that makes sense. I don't think that Lando doesn't want it. I just think that Max knows what it is to win and is not willing to let it go. Not easily.
I think Lando thinks he wants it, and I think Lando, but I don't think he's ready. In a similar way that I talk about Charles sometimes.
I think Lando wants it, but I think the difference between Lando and Max is that Max would never have allowed the last 3 races to have happened the way that they did.
Or Hungary.
Yeah, there's no way Hungary would have been done. Max and Lando's response to Hungary would have never, ever been the same. And then I also think there's no way that Max would be okay with how long it took for priorities. Yeah. And I also think Max would have made it very publicly known that things were not being handled in a professional manner, as he has done before. And so I think when you look at championship mentality and you look at people who are ready to do it, the thing that Lando is missing, and that I hope he eventually gets, and maybe he's getting closer to it, is the ability and the desire to fight your team when they are wrong. Yep. And when they are affecting your chance at winning. Max, Lewis, Fernando, all world championship drivers and all drivers that are willing to tell their team that they're wrong.
And it was the thing you said, like, they have to be selfish or like mean. And like, you cannot win a championship and have everybody be your best friend. You can't.
I said this online, but not on the podcast. I think if people don't understand what I mean by being perceived, like by a champion mentality, meaning that you have to be willing to not be the nice guy, doesn't mean that you have to be an asshole. It doesn't mean that you have to be a jerk to people that work with you, or that you have to say horrible things, or that you have to be an actually mean person. It means that you have to be not afraid to be perceived as a mean person. You have to be not so worried about people liking you, and you have to not be so worried about being the nice guy. And if you don't know what I mean by that, I highly recommend that you watch the last 3 minutes of episode 7 of The Last Dance, when Michael Jordan is asked if his intensity over the years came at the expense of being known as a nice guy. And it is a question that throws him off, and he's not really sure how to answer it, and he does tear up in his answer. And his answer is essentially, none of my teammates could ever say that Michael asked me to do something that he didn't do himself, first of all. And second of all, he wanted to win, but he wanted everybody to be a part of winning. He wanted his teammates to feel what it was like to win. And he wanted to play to the best of his abilities, which meant that everybody had to play to the best of their abilities as well. He asked for what he knew that they could give him. And I really think you should watch it, because watching him speak on it explains exactly what I think Lando is missing right now. Is he lonely? Yeah, I think if that question makes you tear up, he probably was lonely through most of his career and life. But you have to choose that over, and I think that was something that was brought up recently over summer break. I don't remember what podcaster it was or reporter it was, but they said that they had been speaking with Lando, and they asked Lando how things feel at the top, and Lando said lonely. And the thing is, that's something that I think everyone knows about being a champion, being that level. The only people that know what you're going through are the other 19 guys that you are competing against, and none of them can be your best friend and also be your competition. So you have to be willing, if you are going to win a championship like this, if you're going to be and I think this applies to things outside of athletics as well. If you are going to be at the top of your game for anything, you have to be willing to not worry what people think about you. Well, it's not even just cutthroat. I think it's more of I think when we look at Lando, it's not even just about being cutthroat, right? It's not just about he should have stayed out and won in Hungary, or that he should have demanded to be prioritized. It's that you have to not worry what other people think of you. Because if you worry what other people think of you, you are going to make the decision that is what you think other people want, and not the decision that, if you are a champion, in your heart is the decision you have to make to win. And so it's for Lando is and this is not just a Lando problem, this happens with everyone, but if you compare Lando to Oscar, it's exactly. And it's this, I think it's sometimes, I think sports also can apply to your real life as well. And the thing is, if you decide what you want out of life, right? You decide that you want to have friends. You decide that you want to be really close with your family. You decide that you want to be best at your job. And it's sort of that diagram that you get from when you go to college, when they say you can have a social life, you can have sleep, or you can have great grades, and you only get to pick 2. I think it's the same thing when you're talking about something like this. And again, championship mentality can be applied to your own life, whether that is starting a business, or running your own thing, or doing social media, or doing your job and wanting to move up in your career. At a certain point, you are going to have to make a decision that is about your best interests. And that is going to be in contrast with being perceived well by the other people and being liked, because people like you because you're not in their way. People don't like people that are challenging them. People don't like people who are the reason they're not winning.
They want to step on you.
And it's also, sometimes I wonder, they want to step over you, and also they want you not to step on them. And that is the problem. There's only, on a ladder up, there are only so many rungs, and you cannot share the rungs on the way up. You either need to be ahead or behind, but you can't stand together. And I think that is the thing that Lando has to get past. And I worry that he didn't get past it fast enough this year.
No, I don't think he did. And he might be getting there. And I think if he loses this season, I think that might put him in that place next year. But I don't know.
My hot take is that he either, if he were to lose this season, it either puts him in a place where he does go on a revenge edit, or it shows that he'll never be a champion. If he does not come back from this and like demand to be the person, I think the answer is that he goes on to be a good driver.
Agreed. I feel that. That's actually, I actually see where you're going.
Because like by contrast, Max losing this year is not going to stop Max from driving like a world championship driver.
It's just going to be in the cars.
Yep.
More or less.
And it's honestly going to make Max a little bit more intense, which if that's even possible. So that's the hot take of the
Lewis
century.
in the Ferrari, that's not that bad.
I think actually here's our last possible suggestion that I want you to weigh in on. If Lewis goes to Ferrari next year as he is, and the car is good, and he goes back into real fighting form.
Yep.
Do we think if Lewis finishes ahead of Max next year, Max goes to Aston Martin?
Yeah.
Anyway, I think the future of Formula One is bright and competitive.
Agreed.
In a way that it was not at the beginning of the year.
I know. When I came at the beginning of the season, we were very downtrodden and just yapping about like Max lapping everybody, and now we're like, who's going to win the championship this year?
Could be anyone. Could literally be anyone.
Anyone's game.
Well, thanks for joining me, Jordan. I had so much fun.
Thanks for having me. Always.
If you don't want to watch these races alone, you can join the actual grid chat. I host a group chat of motorsports fans where fan behavior is encouraged, and there's no such thing as a stupid question. We watch these races live together, chat about breaking news, and of course, send each other an unhealthy amount of memes. If you'd like to join the grid chat, you can do so at tandemproductions.com/grid chat. There will also be a link to that in the episode description. Once you fill out the form on the webpage there, you'll get an invite via email from me. If you want to connect, let me know what you thought about the episode, or even just ask me another question that you'd like me to cover on the show. You can find me on all social media platforms at Marissa Kamari. And one of the best ways to connect with me is if you're listening to this podcast on Herd FM. You can find me in the community section on Herd FM, where my username is just my first name, Marissa. And once we follow each other, after every episode that you listen to, I'll be able to comment and have a conversation with you directly. So again, my username on Herd FM is Marissa. As always, I've been your host, Marissa Tandon, and thank you for joining the Grid Chat.